Yes, going to try this. I'm on Google Meet while I am going to lecture. Yes, good afternoon. This is Friday, September the 4th. Today we are going to talk about what most people think about when they think of the Renaissance, and that is art. Hopefully I've told you before, but if not, I'll probably tell you about 1,000 more times. There is an art component in the AP Euro exam. Does that mean art will be in every question? No, but it does mean that, there'll be questions regarding art. Now, does that mean I have to memorize the names and creators of a lot of paintings? No. What that does mean is that you need to be familiar with artistic styles of European history. You need to be able to differentiate between the Renaissance and the Italian Renaissance, the Northern Renaissance, Baroque, Impressionism, Romanticism, Neoclassicism, etc., etc., etc. And have some kind of a grip on the historical backgrounds of each one. But anyway, let's get into this. Beginning with Roman numeral 15, you see up there, the greatest invention of the last 1,000 years was the printing press. And I mean, that's just, nobody else is even close. The printing press, which was invented by Johann Gutenberg, and once again, the printing press is not complete. It's the movable type printing press. Gutenberg only made one small innovation, and that was he was able to make interchangeable letters to go into a sheet, a rack, and then he could change the letters on that page, and then tightly bind them together, and then press it down into the ink blot, press it down on the paper, and voila, you have a printed page. Before that, you either had to carve wooden blocks or forge metal blocks, and both ways were either too expensive or you couldn't make many copies of them. And before that, they just hand wrote every book. Point of the matter being, books were just, most people had never seen a book. So, 1456 was when Gutenberg invented his movable type printing press. And yes, as you know, the first book he printed out of it was a Bible, but not the last. Oddly enough, Johann Gutenberg didn't really make much money out of his invention, and to be honest, he died in relative poverty. But anyway, the printing press, as you see there, made knowledge cheap. And see, that's the thing. And spread not just the Renaissance, but all kind of knowledge throughout Europe. But for now, the Renaissance. They were even able to make lithograph drawings that they could put on these pages. So by 1500, and remember it was only invented in 1456, there were more than 1,000 printing presses scattered throughout Europe, and they had published almost 40,000 individual titles, between 8 to 10 million copies. And that just dwarfed the number of books that had been printed before. Now, probably still at this time, 50% of these books were still religious, but that was going to change. Printing became one of the largest industries in Europe. Books encouraged scholarly research. That means research of knowledge for the sake of getting more knowledge, but they also encourage the standardization of knowledge. Is that a term for your test? No, but it's a good term to know. It means that knowledge was standardized. For example, how many feet are in a mile? Someone out there said 5,280. And that's the same answer I have. And that's the same answer that is standard. For example, how many planets are in the solar system? 8. And then there's Uranus. But we won't talk about that. But yeah. But you see, standardization of knowledge. Everyone was learning the same thing. and cheap printed books caused an explosion of the reading public. But, not right away. I mean, even by 1500, even though there were 8 to 10 million copies floating around Europe, that still meant the great majority of the population of Europe were ignorant, illiterate, and unwashed. But eventually that was going to change. Okay, let's go on and talk about art. Yes. Of course, when one thinks of the Renaissance, one thinks about works of art. What is art? 2 definitions. Both of them are cheap and easy. Definition 1 is the technical definition. What is art? Art is, wait for it, 4 words, expression on a medium. 4 words. Meaning that art is some way that some person has decided to create something, be it either painting a picture or singing a song or sculpting a statue or any number of things. Expression on a medium. 2. Now the second definition is even simpler than the first. It comes from the greatest artist of the 20th century, a guy by the name of Pablo Picasso. Pablo Picasso was born in Spain, but he spent most of his life in Paris, France, because if you were an artist, that's where you went. And so, yes, and he was the greatest artist of the 20th century. His best known piece of art is something called, don't get you too dizzy here, look where I'm pointing my camera, called Guernica. Do you see up there? I can't bring it up there too close. But yeah, I have in my art gallery the picture of Guernica because it is so important. One day we'll talk about Guernica. But Guernica is not only important as a work of art, Guernica is also important as a commentary on the activities of the 20th century, specifically Adolf Hitler using a town in Spain, Guernica, as a testing ground for these new weapons he had, stupid dive bombers. And he spent 4 hours bombing a small town into the ground. And Pablo Picasso painted that. And yeah, it's commentary. Google it sometime. But anyway, so how does that define art? Pablo Picasso, who, like I said, was the richest artist of the 20th century, was once asked by a reporter. The reporter said, "What is art?" Picasso said, "What is not?" And there it is. What is not? I like that. What does that mean? It means that anything that has been created is art. I'm sure that several times a day, you and I venture into the bathroom and, those objects that we use to do our business, have a specific form and a function. They were created by someone. Are they art? Yes, they are. Nobody ever said art had to be pleasing. Nobody said art had to be pretty, or any of those things. But it is art. Okay, so let's talk about the Renaissance artists. Remember that the Renaissance artists that we're talking about were supposed to be trained in the Renaissance educational model. That is to say, they could work in several media, painting, sketching with a pencil, sculpting, etc. For example, now you're not supposed to necessarily, not supposed to necessarily make you memorize works of art, but goodness, please. I mean, you've got to know the Ninja Turtle artist, right? The Ninja Turtle artist, Michelangelo Donatello, Raphael, Leonardo, the Ninja Turtle artists, those guys. Michelangelo, who I consider the greatest of the Renaissance artists. Most people, although most of the non-art world think it's Leonardo da Vinci. Michelangelo, though, actually, even though he painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo really didn't like painting. That's the funny thing. He didn't like painting. In fact, when Pope Julius II, and I hope you just wrote that down, Pope Julius II, when Pope Julius II paid him to paint the ceiling of his private chapel, which is about the dimensions of a basketball floor, with depictions of the Old Testament. Michelangelo didn't like doing it. And by the way, don't let nobody kid you, Michelangelo did not lay on his back to paint that. He had to stand up the whole time, and he did most of the painting himself. And he complained incessantly. And Pope Julius II, who was the other Renaissance Pope we talked about yesterday, there was Alexander VI, then there's Julius II. Both were kind of heavy-handed men, very used to getting their own way. And in fact, at one time, Pope Julius II got so mad at Michelangelo, he hit him with his stick. Michelangelo quit right in the job. But anyway, Michelangelo, Pope Julius II kept saying, "When you gonna be finished? When you gonna be finished?" And Michelangelo would say, "When I'm done, when I'm done." And, that went on. It took him 4 years to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel? Yeah, 4 years. But anyway, he didn't like painting. Michelangelo did not like painting. He considered himself a sculptor. All right, so know and be able to identify the greatest works of the Renaissance masters, the greatest, things like the Mona Lisa, which we'll look at in a minute. But before we do that, what separates Renaissance art from art of the Middle Ages? What separates the art of the Renaissance that we're going to look at now from the art of the Middle Ages? Well, if you ever look at art from the Middle Ages, it's two-dimensional. It has width, it has height, but no depth. And the Renaissance masters were able to solve the problem of perspective. That means to give the picture a third dimension. Let us begin. I'm going to take you on a field trip right now. Prepare to be amazed. Yes. Well, perhaps I will, and perhaps I won't. Darn it. Here we go. Here we go. Prepare to be amazed. Okay, what I want you to do, look out there. I hope it focuses all right. Now, as you look outside, for example, look down. I hope this comes out all right. Look at the grass. Can you see the individual blades of grass? I would think so. Okay, now look on that far hill up there. Do you see the grass? Can you see the individual blades of grass? Obviously not. Look at the trees. Now you know those trees have leaves, don't you? Can you see the leaves individually? Can you pick them out individually? Answer, no. What the Renaissance artist was able to master, I'll set you down, don't get dizzy. What the Renaissance artist was able to master then was that illusion. I don't like the sunlight. Was that illusion. He was able to create the illusion of distance. And that's called atmospheric perspective. And what that means is he would make the objects that were further away fuzzy. Not distorted, but not as clear. And by doing that, he creates the illusion in his painting that what you're looking at, be it a hillside or trees or buildings or whatever, is far away. Example, let's look. Come here, you. Yes. Perhaps you've seen that piece of art before. Yeah, that, of course, is the most famous piece of art in the entire world. It is the most recognizable piece of art in the entire world. It is Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. Now, and I mean, what's really interesting, what's really amazing is that, yeah, this is the most famous piece of art in the entire world, and yet, and by the way, you know where it is today? My garage. No, I'm just kidding. It's in the Louvre, Louvre. Louvre. So you're saying Louvre, I've heard of that. The Louvre is the world's most famous art museum, and it's in Paris, France. It was converted by Napoleon. That's where the old French Bourbon kings lived in Paris, the old Tuileries Palace, and Napoleon converted it into an art museum. And what is most amazing about this little painting we're looking at is just exactly that. It is little. It's a little painting. It's like 29 inches by 20 inches, something like that. It's not very big at all. And so, yeah, this is the Mona Lisa. And if you look back here, this is what I really wanted to show you. Look at these trees. And look at the haze, the fog of the sky. It creates the illusion of three-dimensionality, of a third dimension, of depth behind the Mona Lisa. Yeah, that is atmospheric perspective. Say again, that quality is called atmospheric perspective. Pardon me. Now, let's look at another piece of art that you might recognize. This one. This, also by Leonardo da Vinci, is The Last Supper. Now, pardon me. The Last Supper, Leonardo da Vinci, for all the talent that is associated with him, and he was incredibly talented. Leonardo da Vinci may have had ADHD. In fact, there's a good chance he did, because he was constantly getting bored with projects and then moving on to something else that he found more interesting. And he was always experimenting. And for example, this particular painting, The Last Supper, which of course is a portrait of Christ and the 12 disciples, on where Jesus has just told them, one of you guys is going to betray me. This painting, Leonardo da Vinci used an experimental method of mixing oil and tempera on plaster. And as soon as Da Vinci finished it, it began to fade and deteriorate. Yeah, interesting. But as we look at this painting, I do want to point out a couple of things to you. Maybe some of you have seen the film The Da Vinci Code. Well, there's the allegation in the Da Vinci Code that the Holy Grail was not actually a cup, it was actually a person, the bloodline of Christ. One of the things that is interesting, I mean, this figure here, which sets to the right of Jesus, that's a female. I mean, but everybody knows Jesus' 12 disciples were male. And you know what? None of that has anything to do with what I wanted to point out to you about the other kind of perspective, linear perspective. Look at this picture. You can tell it has a third dimensional quality because look, see the lines in it? The lines tend to slant towards the center of the picture. In fact, all the lines, see the rafters up here? What the artist does, the walls here, what the artist does, he creates straight lines in the picture that head towards the center and creates what is called, in your writing, creates what is called the vanishing point. In this picture, the vanishing point is right above the head of Jesus. If you were here, I would take you out in the hall and show you the vanishing point. And let me see. Well, I guess I didn't put it there. Fiddlesticks. Yeah, but here, okay, use your imagination. If you've ever driven down a long straight road and looked straight ahead, it appears that the sides of the road get closer and closer together. And if the road is really long, it appears that the road disappears altogether. That's called the vanishing point. And the Renaissance artists learned how to use those two tools, the atmospheric perspective, linear perspective, and another tool that they used is called shading or shadowing, whereby, for example, in this painting, shading and shadowing creates, you notice how it indicates that the light is on her face and skin, but you can tell that over here he darkens this so that it appears to be shadows. Same thing with the folds of her clothes. It creates shadowing, it creates a third dimensionality to the picture. And so, atmospheric perspective, linear perspective, and shading and shadowing gives it the piece of art a third dimensional quality. Okay, what is a fresco? A fresco was one of the primary methods of painting during the Renaissance. A fresco is a painting. In fact, the entire Sistine Chapel ceiling is a fresco. It's where you take wet plaster and then you adhere the paint to the wet plaster. And it's a very, tricky process. You have to get the painting done before the plaster dries. Frescoes, you'll find frescoes more in Italy because of the heat, the mild temperatures, and the heat of the summer. Whereas once we get into the Northern Renaissance, you don't see many frescoes in Northern Europe. There's too much humidity in the atmosphere, in the weather. Okay, so one of the earliest of the Renaissance artists you've never heard of, Sandro Botticelli. He did a painting called Primavera, but I want to show you another. Where's that? Yeah, right there. Yes, this is a painting by Sandro Botticelli. It is called Judith and Herlophanies. Now you say, who's Judith and who's Herlophanies? Well, a few things about this painting in it. The painting Judith and Herlophanies, and by the way, I took this picture of this photo in the Cincinnati Museum of Art. Yeah, I mean, 14 years ago, I could have cared less about art. 14 years ago, I didn't know anything at all about art of any kind. And then Mr. Turner, our principal, asked me to teach this course called Arts and Humanities. And I had to learn about art. And you know what? Art's pretty cool. I came to learn. To me, the coolest thing about going to an art museum is that when you go to an art museum and you look at paintings or sculptures, you're not looking at a copy. You're looking at something that artist, that famous person, actually put his hands on. And so this painting here by Judith and Herlophanies, that was done by Sandro Botticelli, was actually touched by Sandro Botticelli. So let's talk about the story of Judith and Herlophanies, though. Judith and like so many other paintings of the Renaissance era, these paintings were themed from the Bible. There was an instance in the Old Testament when the city of Jerusalem and the Jews, the children of Israel, were surrounded by the Assyrians. The city of Jerusalem was completely cut off, and the Assyrian army was led by this dude named Herlophanies. And Herlophanies, what they were doing, they besieged the city. They simply camped out around the city of Jerusalem. Nothing got in, nothing came out, no food. They were going to starve out the city while they watched and waited. And the leaders of the city of Jerusalem didn't know what to do. And on one day, this woman, Judith walks into the meeting and says, look, you want to get rid of this guy, Herlophanies, I can get rid of him for you. And this woman, Judith, was an attractive woman. And so what she does, she and her maidservant, they slip out of Jerusalem and they actually go to the tent, the headquarters of this guy, Herlophanies. And basically, she says, yo, let's have sex. Something like that. And of course, this guy, Herlophanies, is like, of course she wants to be with me because I'm Herlophanies. And so she proceeds to get him drunk. And then she cuts his head off. If you look at the painting, this is the head of Herlophanies. And that's the sword. Now, this story about Judith and Herlophanies, will be a common theme in art history. We'll actually look at some other depictions of it. This is not by far the most famous depiction. I mean, art students of that era, and still to this day, are often asked to paint a certain thing, a certain story. Today, artists are asked to paint a nude or perhaps a bowl of fruit, something of that nature. Well, the story of Judith and Herlophanies was a common subject matter. Okay. And so, yes, it was by Sandro Botticelli. Okay, where was I at? Filippo Brunelleschi. Brunelleschi, if you remember watching the Rick Steve video, Brunelleschi engineered the dome of Il Duomo, the cathedral in Florence, and it was the centerpiece of Florence. Wait a minute. Now I have that. Well, I thought I had it. I used to have it. Well, I guess I don't have it. I thought I had it. Anyway, take my word for it. I should have gotten Il Duomo, page 332 in your book. Did I do away with that book? Unfortunately, I did. Horton, you're a bad man. We'll look at it later. So, the period of time, 1480 to 1520, was referred to the High Renaissance. This is what most people think of when they imagine the Renaissance period. Michelangelo Buonarroti, my favorite Renaissance artist, created David. Hang on. What you're looking at now is the most famous sculpture in the world, the sculpture of David. Marbles, one solid piece of marble. And by the way, this piece of marble, this is 14 feet tall from here to here, and it is another 4 feet of the pedestal that he stands on, and it's one solid piece of marble. Now, if you know anything about marble, marble is kind of a hard rock. It just amazes me how you carve a figure so intricately out of such a hard rock. And answer, I don't know. I mean, think about it. One wrong strike of a chisel, because he uses basically 3 tools. He uses chisel, he uses hammer, and he uses 4, file, sandpaper. And yeah, he creates this, very finely crafted. And this, to me, is not the most difficult, but it's made of marble. Yeah, one piece of rock. It took him 2 years, I believe, to finish this. In fact, when he went to the quarry to get his piece of marble, the piece of marble that he chose had a big fissure, a crack, a weakness, a flaw in it. But Michelangelo always said he could, see the creature inside the rock. While we're at Michelangelo, talking about Michelangelo, let's pull up his other works of art. That's David. This is the Pietà. Not a Pietà, the Pietà. Yes, this is the Pietà, which was done by Michelangelo as well. It shows Mary cradling the fallen body of Christ. The word Pietà means Mary cradling the fallen body of Christ. There are several Pietàs, but this is the Pietà. Where would you find it? It is in the Sistine. No, it is in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. I wish I had you guys with me, because I have a bunch of art books. I could show you all this stuff, but in my travels, and I have been to Europe 4 times. And in my first journey to Europe, we actually went to Rome, and we were able to go inside St. Peter's Basilica. St. Peter's Basilica is the most beautiful man-made thing I have ever seen in my life. And yeah, and it's just one of the things in there. Once again, it's another example of a marble. Look at the folds of her gown. Look at the folds, the cloth there. He carves that out of a piece of marble. Took him 2 years to build that, to construct that. You can't see it from here, but Michelangelo once had heard that someone else was going to try and claim the credit for having done this, and so at night he slipped in and he carved his name into her lapel, right there. Artists are interesting people, don't you think? So yeah, that's the Pietà. Okay, look, it's more. I want to find this. On that same trip, when I was in Rome, we went to St. Peter and Chains Church in Rome. And this is Michelangelo's statue of Moses. It adorns the coffin, the tomb of Pope Julius II. And the face here is the face of Pope Julius II. The relationship between Michelangelo and Pope Julius II was rather interesting because, like I told you before, at one point in time, Pope Julius II had hit Michelangelo. And then after he finished the ceiling, after 4 years, of course, Julius II paid him. And Michelangelo actually felt bad when the Pope died. Michelangelo was a very devout Catholic, you might say. And so, yeah, do I have anything else from Michelangelo? No. But I do have another example of David. This is Donatello's David. Whereas Michelangelo's David was 18 feet tall, including the pedestal, this is 5 feet tall. Whereas Michelangelo's David was made of marble, this one is made of bronze. And yeah, notice, by the way, that here David has already cut off the head of Goliath. And I mean, you know, I didn't notice until recently, David still has a rock in his hand. I'd never seen that before. Yeah. So, a couple more works of art before I let you go. Yes, the work of Raphael. I like this one. Take a minute to look at that. I think that's funny, don't you? This, you know, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, and Raffaello Santi, and Donatello. These, once again, are the four main Renaissance artists. They were contemporaries, meaning that they all knew each other. They all lived about the same time. They all knew each other. Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci didn't like each other very much. By the way, in your painting, that is Raphael. This guy, Michelangelo. But this is Raphael's School of Athens. Interestingly enough, during the time that the four of those guys lived, it was believed by everyone that Raphael was going to be the best. You know, that is why Pope Julius II hired Raphael to be his own personal painter. I don't know why he went out and got Michelangelo to do the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, but many of the works that you find in the Vatican, St. Peter's Basilica, are by Raphael. But to be honest, over time, and time has proven out that Michelangelo was the greater artist, and Leonardo da Vinci, I guess. You know, anyway, a couple more things I do want to show you before I let you go for today. Yes. And yes, that is yours truly, not the horse, but the other guy. This is the Da Vinci Horse. Like I was telling you a while ago, Leonardo da Vinci was probably had ADHD. He was always starting projects and then, you know, going off and doing something else. So Leonardo da Vinci was commissioned, paid by one of the mayors of one of the towns in Milan to design for him a defensive perimeter around his city. And so Leonardo da Vinci accepts the payment, goes off there and starts to work, and gets bored doing it. And instead, Leonardo da Vinci begins creating this horse. Leonardo da Vinci's horse, and by the way, was made of clay, not like this one, which is made of cast iron. But yeah, and he builds this ginormous horse and leaves it there. The terrible thing was, though, that remember yesterday I talked about how how the city leader, I forget what his name was, invited King Charles VIII to come down and help settle disputes in Milan. Well, the French came down and they used Leonardo's horse for target practice, and there's nothing left of it. Now you say, well, Mr. Horton, where is this painting from? Well, it's in Grand Rapids, Michigan. In Grand Rapids, Michigan, there's this wonderful park called the Frederick A. Meyer, and that's Meyer as in Meyer Food Stores, Meijer. The Frederick A. Meyer Sculpture Park, and this is the centerpiece of it, the Da Vinci Horse. Yeah, quite incredible. You know, what's really incredible is the design Da Vinci had. I mean, notice that this horse is balanced on two hooves. This one is not touching the ground, as you see. Yeah, okay, a couple more pictures I have to show you. And no, I think that is it. Yes, that is it. And so, yeah. Yes. All right. So, getting back to the matter at hand. So, yeah, Michelangelo Buonarroti sculpted David, sculpted Moses, sculpted the Pietà, painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel for Pope Julius II, which most people consider that his crowning achievement. But, you know, to me, honestly, the Pietà, no, actually, no, I'm sorry. David is the one. Leonardo da Vinci, Madonna of the Rocks, of course, the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, and then various diagrams for various and sundry proposed inventions. He had design for so many things. The problem with Leonardo's inventions was that when he designed them, they did not have the technology to create the small interlocking parts, small interlocking metallic parts that they would need to pull it off. I mean, you know, for example, the steam engine. The steam engine wasn't invented until James Watt created one in the 18th century. But people had known about the power of steam since the ancient Greeks and wondered how they could harness it. And it wasn't until James Watt had figured out how to use a condenser that, Leonardo also did diagrams of human anatomy. As it says there, Donatello's David, statues commemorating the triumphs of Florence over Milan, and then, of course, Raphael, the School of Athens, which is the one we just saw. That was the School of Athens. Yes. The ability to forward art and artist meant social status for the rich people of the Renaissance. As it says there, often the artists put themselves into their work of art, and sometimes they would put the benefactors. Make sure you know that word there, patricians. Patricians, those are people who paid money to support the art. And so oftentimes the artists would put themselves into the work of art, or the patricians, meaning the people who bankrolled it, into their artwork. Okay. Why don't we end there for today? Today is Friday, and we will continue on Tuesday, September the 8th. Yes, I think that's good. And thank you for your attention.